Earlier this month, President Biden imposed a nationwide vaccine mandate.
So tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated.
Make no mistake, Biden overstepped his authority here. But the debate about mandates and passports for COVID-19 vaccines has been going on for a long time, and we are still in a pandemic. So what are the libertarian options here? The debate about vaccine policy is nuanced and controversial, so let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Before Biden came in and proposed these radical changes, constitutional law professor Ilya Somin had already shared some of his thoughts about this on MSNBC.
Professor Somin, thanks so much for coming on the show tonight. Explain to our viewers why vaccine mandates, in your view, are not oppression, not authoritarianism, not tyranny, as some self-styled libertarians have claimed in recent days.
I think they are a restriction on freedom, but they're a very small one with a very large payoff, not just for the person who gets vaccinated, but for other people they come into contact with as well. And that makes them very different from other infringements on liberty that are either much larger, as in the case of lockdowns, for example, or where there's little or no benefit except possibly a benefit to the individual himself.
To encourage a healthy discussion about vaccine passports, we asked him to clarify the options we should consider in this situation.
A vaccine mandate is one that says everybody or almost everybody must get the vaccine. Whereas a vaccine passport says essentially you're not required to get the vaccine, but if you don't have it, you won't be allowed to do certain things. So let me distinguish three types of situations. One is where it's just purely left up to individual businesses and other private organizations, and they can decide, do they want to require vaccination for their employees or for their customers? That's a purely private system. At least for libertarians, that ought to be completely uncontroversial. A second level is a state-issued document which shows that you've been vaccinated. So that's a second level where the government provides a credential, but it leaves it up to the private sector how it's going to be used. The third level, which is obviously the most controversial, is the government not only provides a certificate, but also the government says that there are certain activities that you can do only if you're vaccinated.
It's clear that the first option is the most libertarian way to deal with passports, leaving it to private companies and businesses, not the government, to decide whether to require some type of proof of vaccination. But could there possibly be a justification for government mandates?
So as a matter of principle, I think mandatory vaccines for very dangerous contagious diseases can be justified, even on libertarian grounds. The basic way in which they can be justified is that it's a very small infringement on liberty. You get your shot, and in a day or two, you're back to normal and you go on with your normal life. There are exceptions for a few people who have very serious health conditions which make the vaccine dangerous to them. But for 99.9% of people, it's a very small infringement on liberty. Now, I understand if you want to be a 100% consistent, rights-oriented libertarian, you might want to say no restriction of liberty is ever justified, no matter how large the payoff. But if you want to take that position, then you run into serious problems that maybe have nothing to do with vaccination. So if, for instance, you need to make a small violation of property rights to save the world from destruction, imagine that kind of situation. If you're going to be that hardcore about your insistence on never violating liberty of any kind, then you would have to say, well, no, we can't violate property rights even a small bit, even if the only alternative is the destruction of the world.
When we talked about a pandemic policy last year, we debated what kind of government action would be permissible in accordance with libertarian theory. To summarize Professor Humer's argument from our previous video, any individual at risk of carrying COVID-19 poses a risk of physically harming other people. Therefore, others could use coercion to protect themselves. And since individuals could justly do that, this could be delegated to the state. Obviously, lockdowns are an extreme measure with extreme consequences. In fact, for a deeper dive, our Cost of Lockdowns video with Professor Anthony Davies discusses many of the downsides of such measures. Businesses can also apply rules that make sense for them and their customers. Some might require vaccines. Some might require testing for those who choose not to be vaccinated. Some might choose no mandates at all, and consumers will be able to choose where they do their business. Government participation in this process should be limited. This should not be implemented through overreaching executive orders. Government needs to let businesses choose.
I'm not sure that vaccine passports are better or worse than vaccine mandates for dangerous diseases. Vaccine passports might be more desirable in some situations because if, like in the United States and many other nations, we have millions of people who don't want to get vaccinated, if we have a vaccine mandate, if we're going to enforce it, we're essentially going to have to round up millions of people who don't want to get vaccinated and force them to do it. And I think that would be a very dangerous thing to do. So while as a matter of principle, I'm open to vaccine mandates, in practice, it may be vaccine passports are a better alternative, though I'm also open to such policies as which I've advocated before of paying people to get vaccinated. Maybe give each person $500 or $1,000 or some appropriate equivalent for in another country to get vaccinated. And while I would prefer not to have to do that, in some cases that may be better than the alternatives.
COVID won't go away anytime soon. We need to start living with it. However, we also need to make careful decisions today as citizens, since governments around the world have seized a lot of power to control our lives. What do you think is reasonable for governments to do, if anything? Let us know your thoughts on vaccine passports and vaccine mandates. Keep it civil and keep the discussion going.